And to start talking about the specifics of the classical world, we're going to look at the political systems in China, the empires that developed in China. First of all, China and Chinese history and much of these classical civilizations are marked by strong centralization of a government entity. And we talked about that before we went off to lunch. When we talk about China, and maybe the reason that Peter Stearns decided to make China the first chapter of the classical period in your textbook, the College Board certainly addresses it early on in their teachings as well. The China of today, so 2015 China, shares the closest links to Chinese classical civilization, more so than any other civilization today shares with its own classical civilization. So the China today is most like classical China. I mean, obviously, dramatic differences. But in terms of culture and in terms of how people live their lives, in terms of the traditions that are going to maintain themselves for two millennia, the China of today bears its closest resemblance to classical China, more so compared to any other civilization we're going to talk about. Well preserved, absolutely. China's story, China's history, or at least the last 2,000 years of Chinese history, is one of dynasties, of dynastic rule. This is based on a belief in what is known as the mandate of heaven, which we see through a lot of East Asian cultures, where the heavens, the gods, bestow upon a particular family the right to rule. So this is kind of like divine right of kings that you guys might have heard of. The gods bestow upon a particular family the right to rule, and as long as they rule well, they will continue to rule. But when they stop ruling well, which could encompass a lot of things, when they stop maybe treating the people well, when they stop, keeping an eye on their borders, when they start being too harsh with the populace, whatever, the gods might not favor their rule anymore, and the mandate of heaven will be passed on to another ruling family. This happens in Chinese history for much of the last 3,000 years, this idea of a dynastic cycle. Ruling family comes in, they start kicking butt and taking names, and they organize things better, and they collect more taxes, and they grow more food, and they store more food for the lean times, and they keep outsiders out, and they keep insiders chilled out. And then they stop doing that. And then they fall. And then another family rises up. And they do a great job. And they do all the things that a ruling dynasty is supposed to do. And then they stop doing that. And then they fall. And another family comes in and starts taking care of business until they don't. Then they fall. And this is the dynastic cycle in Chinese history, and this spans about 3,000 years. Fortunately for AP World History, we have a song that will help us remember the dynasties of China. There is no real purpose outside of remembering the order of these dynasties that you would ever want to learn to sing this song. But I will teach it to you, and we will sing it together, and then we will press on. It is sung to the tune of Frere Jacques, which you guys might be familiar with, or Where is Thumbkin, if you're not going with the original. And it is going to go through the names of the classical Chinese dynasties, starting with the Shang Dynasty, okay? I'm just going to say them first so you can hear them. After I say them, would you repeat it? Shang. Shang. That's easy. Zhou. Zhou. Good. Qin. Qin. Han. Han. Sui. Sui. Tang. Tang. Song. Song. Wan. Wan. Ming. Ming. Qing. Qing. Republic. Okay, I'm mixing an English word into there. And then a guy named Mao, and then a guy named Deng. Okay? So anyway, to the tune of... we skipped a couple individuals, yes, but we're getting the big ones in. Okay, is everybody ready?
I got it.
This is our AP World Chinese Dynasty song. If you forget it, it is on YouTube from other people, but now you guys are going to be on YouTube singing this. And it's a 1 and a 2 and a you know what to do. Shang Qin Han, Shang Qin Han, sweet tang song, sweet tang song. One Ming Qing Republic, one Ming Qing Republic, Mao and Deng, Mao and Deng. We'll do it one more time, and then you guys will have it in your notes, and you guys can practice on your own if you want. But those students that excel on the AP exam, at some point during that exam, they are sitting there with their test and their time limit, and they are singing to themselves the Chinese Dynasty song to help make sure they're putting things in correct order. Shang Qin Han, Shang Qin Han, sweet tang song, sweet tang song. One Ming Qing Republic, one Ming Qing Republic, Mao and Deng, Mao and Deng. Very good, guys. If anyone would like to come in tomorrow and start the day, or 2 days from now, start the day with that song for us, I'm sure we would all appreciate it. So that is the dynastic cycle. That is the dynastic cycle. Through these series of Chinese dynasties, taking us from the second millennium of before the Common Era all the way until 1980. All right. Now, when we go Wan Ming Qing Republic, republic is a fancy word that means no king anymore. All right. So the Republican era of China is when they got rid of the last Qing emperor. We'll talk about him at the end of the year. They got rid of the last Qing emperor, and now it was a republican state. Like, we're a republican state. We have no king, right? We're a democratic republic. No king, and we choose representatives to decide things for us. China is not a democratic republic. They're a one-party republic, right? Awesome. We're going to talk about really briefly, three classical Chinese dynasties, starting with the Zhou dynasty. Actually, let's leave that up there for a moment. Let's leave our map up here. I'm controlling a separate map up here. The Zhou dynasty. Okay, so the Shang dynasty, we don't know all that much about the Shang dynasty. Okay, we know they were there. We have found, you might have seen reading in chapter 1 last year, they used like oracle bones for like prophecy and things like this. We don't know much about the Shang dynasty. Very loose, not a centralized state whatsoever. The Zhou dynasty, we see we've got 700 years of Zhou history here. And that ZH kind of gets like a hard J. From around 1000 to 258 BCE. But as we mentioned the other day, Confucius lives during the Zhou dynasty. And Confucius' thing, as like kind of a mid-level government bureaucrat guy, was, man, there's a lot of problems here. We are having a hard time. He's living in the 6th century BCE, 500s. We're having a hard time keeping order in our society. We're having a hard time keeping outsiders out, as China was all decentralized and there were strong landlords throughout China. And so Confucius starts teaching, and eventually his teachings get written down into a book called anybody recall? The Analects, very good. But the Zhou dynasty never adopts Confucian ideology. It only picks up after his death. Yes, sir?
I was going to say that, how you said, well, at least not what you said, the map says that.
Yeah.
It's like, it says that Zhou is like around 800 years lifespan.
Yeah.
It's very, very misleading because like it was only in power for like 200.
Well, it depends on what we're talking about being in power. This is before the Zhou dynasty, and the Shang dynasty is before we even have like an established idea of a Chinese state. In fact, the word China comes from the Qin dynasty, and the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, we'll talk about him in a moment, considers himself the first emperor of China. So if you want to say, well, when does China really begin? Most historians point to Qin Shi Huangdi and the Qin dynasty after the Zhou. So this is very loose. There's a number of other dynasties and ruling families that are ruling other parts of China at the same time as the Zhou. The Zhou was like the biggest, and of those disorganized entities was the most organized for the most period of time, but it wasn't a strong centralized state, and no one considers it it's considered an early Chinese civilization, but it is not considered like early China. Okay? So yeah, we've got this long period of time here, but throughout almost this entire period of time, China's going through a period known as the Warring States period, where it's just pretty much constant battles and chaos and conflicts between different landlords, different powerful landowners in different regions that are competing for control. So the Zhou dynasty ruled in a feudal system, which we kind of talked about, where the ruling emperor of the Zhou dynasty would maybe give some land to his family or his friends and his supporters for them to maintain it and pay him tribute, pay him taxes.
Isn't that feudalism?
That's a feudal system. This is feudal China. Despite the weakness of the Zhou dynasty and the lack of centralization, they would see some expansion during their time in rule. Especially important is the stretching of the Zhou dynasty and this Chinese civilization from this northern important river called the Huanghe River, which is the Yellow River, to a southern important river called the Yangtze. So these two rivers are the two most important waterways in mainland China. The Zhou dynasty connects the two of them. Okay, so their empire will span those two rivers, and this begins China being known by not only the Zhou but later Chinese dynasties. Begins China as being known as the Middle Kingdom. All right, with the idea being the Chinese are absolutely in belief that their civilization is the center of the universe. All right. Now, let's not think them bad for thinking that, because what does every civilization think it is? When England thought it was the center of the universe, what did England put at the middle of the map? What did England put at 0 degrees longitude? Greenwich, England, actually, but close to London. They put Greenwich, England, right at 0 degrees. So it's not bad or anything. It just is what it is. Civilizations think they do things the best. The Chinese are wickedly ethnocentric, meaning they think their ethnicity, their background, their civilization is the cat's pajamas, which is a specific historical term meaning awesome. Yes?
I was going to add some
yeah, please.
reasoning to that, because here's the problem: if you're from Europe,
yeah.
like you can't really consider yourself, like, especially in the Middle Ages, you can't really consider your country the best. Like, you can have that belief, but you can't. But you see a bunch of like other strong countries like surrounding you. Like if you were England, then you saw France.
There's a lot more competition in Western Europe.
Absolutely. Right next to you, and everybody was pretty much at the same level of advancement in terms of like, weaponry and.
China kind of stood alone.
Yeah, and our problem was that we were on like the far east side of the world. Well, not far east. Like that's really subjective, but. What I'm trying to say is that we were surrounded by, Mongols that were, well, not Mongols, they didn't even exist at this point.
Earlier nomadic people, yeah.
Yeah, earlier nomadic people that didn't really have that, settlements, that weren't sedimentary, so we thought that we were the best just because there was nothing around us.
Exactly. Yes, ma'am.
It's kind of like how we on Earth think that maybe there's other life out there on other planets that like we do, like we think we're the most advanced, but, there could be stuff out there that we don't even know exists.
Absolutely. We can't even. And in fact, more often than not, except maybe some more modern movies, but like even back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, when human beings envisioned aliens, they all kind of look like us. They got 2 arms, they got 2 legs. They might have a little bit of a bigger head, but I had this friend growing up that pretty close to an alien-sized head. Big eyes, maybe, but still 2 eyes. We often made them look like us because we view us as like normal. This is the way it should look. So I'm going to build an adorable alien, give him a little bit of a bigger head, give him a finger that glows, but he's going to have 2 arms and he's going to have 2 legs and he's going to want to go home. All right, so for China, the Zhou dynasty lacked centralization. So we don't talk about the Zhou dynasty even as being the first Chinese dynasty. We actually now have to point to the Qin dynasty for that. So as the Zhou dynasty was mired in conflict, as the Zhou dynasty is mired in this era of warring states, one warlord will rise above the rest to defeat the Zhou and to defeat all the other warlords in China, and he will unify his holdings, and he will proclaim his empire as the state of Qin, which is where we get our name China today. So this Q-I-N is pronounced Qin. That Q gets like a CH sound. Just like when we sang Wanming Qing Republic. The Qing Dynasty is Q-I-N-G. So this is Qin Shi Huangdi. Shi Huangdi is the name he took when he became the emperor of a unified China. Shi Huangdi means first emperor. So he unified China. This is where we kind of consider the China of today being born. Yes?
Is Qin like his last name?
No.
It's the family name.
Oh, okay.
It's the family name.
So that's what we refer to, or like the age?
Qin Shi Huangdi, we would call him Qin Shi Huangdi. In East Asian cultures, in European and American culture, we have our given name first, and then our family name second. So I am William. That's the name my parents gave me. Doby. That's the name I was stuck with because of who my parents were. In East Asia, when we talk about like Mao Zedong, Mao is the family name. Deng Xiaoping, Deng is the family name. So it kind of gets flipped. Yao Ming, you guys might remember him. He's a tall basketball player from a few years back, right?
Yeah.
And he put Yao on his back. And a bunch of ignorant Americans would have thought, why does he put his first name on his back? No, Yao is his family name there. Anyway, we press. Qin Shi Huangdi is going to be that. He ends the Zhou dynasty, and he ushers in a unified Chinese state.
So he has to be that one guy.
He is a brutal and harsh ruler, which shouldn't be surprising because how do you defeat previous dynasties? By being brutal and harsh, and you can't crack an egg without making a bunch of omelets. Mess that one up. You can't make an omelet without cracking a bunch of eggs. Nor can you defeat a dynasty, take down a state, without being quite brutal yourself. So Qin Shi Huangdi rules China absolutely. And absolutely harsh. In 221 before the Common Era. He adopts a legal system known as legalism, which kind of is going to be easy for us to remember. The legalist system, or legalism, in China was a harsh set of laws for the Chinese people, with the idea that human beings were evil, essentially, and they needed to be pacified by harsh laws and strict punishments. Think Hammurabi's Code and an eye for an eye. In a couple days, we'll look at some legalist writings and compare them to Confucianism. So Qin Shi Huangdi was able to maintain his power because he ruled his state with an iron fist. He took control of all those feudal states that had previously been controlling their local lands. He took control of those. He called all of those landlords to the capital and asserted his authority over them. So none of them could challenge his rule. Qin Shi Huangdi is going to establish an elaborate bureaucracy in China. This is a word we need to know. A bureaucracy is a rule by government officials. All right? Like a democracy is a rule by the people. A bureaucracy is essentially a rule by government officials. So you have Qin Shi Huangdi, the emperor, selecting in one way or another who are going to be the bureaucrats, and the bureaucrats carry out the wishes of the emperor. This is what centralized states do. Centralized states have to have one voice, the emperor, telling many voices, the bureaucrats, how to live or how to dictate his rule. No longer do those landlords who originally held power in their local areas, no longer do those landlords hold sway. They're gone. Qin Shi Huangdi does not want landlords, because what do landlords do to kings? They want to stab him in the back and become the next king. Qin Shi Huangdi eliminates the landlords. And for the bureaucracy, Qin Shi Huangdi doesn't want aristocrats. He doesn't want rich families being bureaucrats necessarily. Why?
Because they could definitely
They could maybe threaten you. So he wants bureaucrats from the lower classes. Still intellectually wise and all, but he wants bureaucrats from the lower classes who will be thankful to him for giving him such a good job, right? So he will have loyalty amongst his bureaucrats, so they won't stab him in the back, all right? So Qin Shi Huangdi is going to create a strongly centralized China. He's going to also expand Chinese territory. He's going to expand Chinese territory. And we're going to see the Chinese dynasty, or the Qin dynasty, stretching further to the south than the Zhou was ever able to do, along with unifying all of those northern territories. He's going to call for and organize massive construction projects, like the original Great Wall of China,
And his tomb.
which looks like this. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment. This is the Great Wall of China. Now, it would have looked nicer than that when Qin Shi Huangdi built it, but now that's going back 2,200 years. This is the Great Wall of China you guys see today in pictures. This is the Great Wall of China that you guys see today. This is the Great Wall that was built upon the original Qin Shi Huangdi wall that was probably last updated in the 1600s, maybe 1700s. All right? So it's certainly, stuff from 2,200 years ago does not look like this anymore.
But don't mistake it for being modernly built, because like this, they didn't really touch it for the past 300 years.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Qin Shi Huangdi was big about massive construction projects. In addition to the Great Wall, which is like the biggest thing mankind has ever built, Qin Shi Huangdi orchestrated before his death the construction of a burial tomb, the likes of which is still being uncovered in China. Qin Shi Huangdi is also the guy, and I wish I threw a photo on here, he's also the guy that for his burial tomb constructed thousands of these terracotta warriors, a terracotta army. You guys have seen photographs of this. And if the terracotta, it was a literal army to protect and to guard Qin Shi Huangdi in the afterlife. But unfortunately for Qin Shi Huangdi, in addition to being a harsh and repressive unifying ruler of China, he was also a little kooky, and he listened to his doctors too much. And he was looking for eternal life, but he was told that he could gain eternal life from the consumption of mercury. And that probably led to Qin Shi Huangdi's earlier than planned for demise and ultimate, probably starting to lose it a little bit as he went away, as he started to pass away. But we have to remember him because of the unifying aspects to Chinese culture. So on your way out of here, I want to give you, 4 things that Qin Shi Huangdi did to solidify and unify the Chinese state. First, he called for a unified script of the Chinese language. A Chinese Mandarin language that had already been more unified under the Zhou dynasty. Now Qin Shi Huangdi will create a unified script for it.
A writing system.
So a writing system that still persists to this day. Qin Shi Huangdi is going to call for a national census. He's going to find out who his people are and where they're living and how many there are. Why do centralizing emperors need to do this? Yes, see how many there are, so then you can tax them appropriately, right? Or you can get the labor that they can provide. He's going to create a universal system of weights and measures. Do you guys understand how confusing it is to go from the English system to the metric system to the English system to the metric system? Remember that every ancient civilization had their own way to tell how much stuff weighed or how big something was. Qin Shi Huangdi forced upon his empire one unified system, which links everybody up. It gives them a common understanding. And he's also going to move to suppress ideas that might be dangerous to his rule. Qin Shi Huangdi wants to crush intellectuals, especially those who might want to talk about Confucius, for example. Or to crush those intellectuals that might think about overthrowing this harsh ruler. So Qin Shi Huangdi ruled with an absolute fist, iron fist, but that did not lead to a long rule for Qin Shi Huangdi. By 206, so this is 15 years after, by 206, Qin Shi Huangdi has passed away. And now there is no strong central ruler ruling with an iron fist anymore. We begin to see peasant revolts and uprisings, and ultimately one family, the Han family, will rise to prominence in China, and we will talk about them in a couple days.